Season 8, and we have so many great topics. We are going to be talking about comp titles, the future of happy robot voice, how to get feedback on recipes you're testing, and so much more. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Molly Stevens, Andrea Nguyen, and Kristen Donnelly. Hey, everyone. It's been a while.
Hey,
Kate.
Oh, my goodness. I miss you.
Aww.
We miss you.
We do. Yeah.
This is Molly, and I'm not in my regular setup, so I hope I sound okay.
Oh, Molly, you have to leave now. I'm sorry. This is just unacceptable. Unacceptable quality control over here at Everything Cookbooks headquarters. Actually, before we get into our grab bag episode, just kick off season 8, I just want to kind of give a shout out to all the episodes we've already created. We have a back catalog of so many valuable conversations, and they're all free. So if anyone in your life is an aspiring cookbook writer or just really wants to know what goes into creating a cookbook, pass this along, tell them to listen to us. You know, if someone wants to pick your brain about how to get started in cookbooks, just say, actually, why don't you listen to this podcast instead? We give you license to do that.
Yeah, I'm constantly sending people appropriate episodes when I get questions.
Same here, especially the episodes at the beginning, the backlist ones are as good as the frontlist ones, y'all.
100%.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And there's a great search bar on the website, which really helps you find topics and guests. And I love the 6 episodes that we curated for the last break on voice. And I'm loving these crossovers from different seasons and different guests and these recurring themes that come up. I've really enjoyed going back and re-listening as well.
Yeah, you hear things new ways after you have different experiences, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Totally.
And there's also certain evergreen topics that come up again and again. And it's also fun to say, oh, do we still agree with what we said a couple of years ago? Chances are we still do. But, if listeners out there have decided that we've changed our stance on something, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So let's just dig into some of these topics. Just because it's fresh in our heads, I wanted to start off with a really great newsletter that Kristen published on Sunday, September 21st. Kristen, just for our listeners, can you summarize what you talked about in that newsletter?
Oh, thank you, Kate. So it was in light of Jimmy Kimmel being suspended, which already they flip-flopped because of public pressure, I can only imagine. But, what could that mean for cookbooks? The suspension of Jimmy Kimmel, or really just the suppression of free speech. And we're seeing censorship and suppression all over the place, not just in broadcast media, but, the administration is going after the Smithsonian and other federal sites and trying to examine, does what is presented there match their vision for America and American history? Over the past several years, we've seen a lot of cookbooks coming out where there are stories from underrepresented voices. They're examining more of the complexities of American history. And it just got me thinking, would publishers start to get squirrely about signing those kinds of books? Essentially obeying in advance. And fascism experts talk about that sometimes language is written to be very vague. It might be like, this needs to represent the positivity of American history or whatever the language is. And then people take it upon themselves to interpret that and sort of obey in advance rather than saying, what did John Oliver say? It was like, F you, make me, basically. So it was just a plea to, number one, to publishers to say, keep putting out these books, and to readers to keep buying these books, and don't let these bullies take away the cookbooks we all want to see in the world.
And you also made reference to, in sort of 2020, 2022, how we saw publishers were really clamoring to get books from underrepresented people and really play catch up for, forever.
Yeah.
And the fear that progress won't last.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that fear anyway, just because of not even just the administration, but, what's the business side of cookbooks? And cookbooks have gotten more expensive. So they often then require more people to buy them to support them. But then there's also the fear that people would use business as an excuse when actually they're just scared.
Yeah, well, I've thought about this long and hard before the political changes were made, because I am an underrepresented voice
totally.
in food writing for a very long time. Witnessing this surge of interesting stories and voices in food publishing has been really wonderful. But at the same time, behind closed doors, we're all looking at each other going, how long is this really going to last?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a trend? We hope it's not a trend.
Right.
Yes.
So there are the numbers, and publishers during the pandemic, I think, signed a lot more publishing contracts for cookbooks that are now, we're seeing kind of taper off a little bit. The word on the street is that it's just really hard to get cookbook published in place these days. So does that lead to obey in advance as well as self-censorship when you're writing? Do you not want to write anything overly controversial?
That's very true.
Do you not want to speak or write your mind? And I hope that doesn't happen, because words are what we're all about, and expressing ourselves. And, it goes back to what we discuss all along, which is, what do you have to say?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I love, Krista, that your newsletter ends really with a call to action. You talk to publishers, but also to readers, which, they're more readers and buyers. And if you want to continue to see different books in the world, buy them, read them.
Yeah. Talk about them.
Right. Share them.
Yeah, talk about them. There are so many cookbooks that we never hear about in the United States that are published in many other parts of the world that you never even think about could possibly exist. But they interest someone out there.
Yeah.
Not just someone, but many people.
Yeah, it's like the money side of it. Like what we just saw with Jimmy Kimmel seems like it was like there was this grassroots effort for everybody to cancel Disney Plus. So that was like a hit, or cancel their Disney trips. And that requires a huge collective. But then it sounds like there were also people with power, like actors, who went to them and were like, we're not going to work for you. So anyway, nothing in cookbook publishing anyway I've heard of is that dire, but it's just a reminder that, we do have these levers that can be as simple as purchasing a cookbook or talking about a cookbook. And when we do it collectively, that can make some change. But then also, there's people in power, the editors, the salespeople, those who work in publishing, agents who can also keep pushing forward the work that they did. And that's the thing. I don't think in their hearts and minds necessarily that agents and editors want to stop publishing those books.
Right. Publishing has always had that blockbuster model, or at least it's getting more and more these days, where they will put a lot of resources into a few titles, and then they might acquire a ton of other ones. And if like one of those outperforms, it's like a boon, but it's not expected. What I'd hate to see is less of those bets that they're putting out there be diverse. And if they get to be more sort of the same. I mean, we're seeing a lot. Every year, there's like a trend that you see. There's a book that they're like, oh, didn't I just see this book? Like, didn't this book just come out like 6 months ago? And it's like, what? And it's on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, how is this possible? So you would hate for those books to kind of steer people too far in a very homogenous direction.
Yeah. A lot of like generic feeling. I love Mediterranean books, but I especially love when they have a sense of place. But there's a lot of like generic Mediterranean books right now.
Completely, 100%.
And then also, supposedly next year is the year of all of the protein books.
Oh, yes.
Oh, good Lord.
Vietnamese protein, Andrea.
Vietnamese protein. Oh, God, I'm low meating it for the
did
environment.
Asian tofu, but you just released that book.
I did Asian tofu. I know.
I will say this season, we have a lot of really interesting stories about different ways that publishing works. So stay tuned for those. We have a great conversation that's with somebody who gets pitched even more books than we get pitched. So stay tuned to hear what she has to say about cookbook trends. It's really fun. But I just want to now segue. We've talked about the importance of diverse voices, but let's talk about what voice, like we've talked about voice a lot on this podcast. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but when we launched Everything Cookbooks, it was before people were really talking about AI on a daily basis. And now we're in this world of AI sort of bubble. And how does that affect voice? Let's just talk about AI and robots. Do you think they'll have a place? Have you heard anybody using it? I know when we talked, Andrea, when we talked to Emily Weinstein about New York Times Cooking, I think AI and what it would do with online recipes was already a worry. I mean, are we seeing progress there?
Well, the New York Times sued Anthropic, or they have a lawsuit.
It's still ongoing.
Yeah, it was still ongoing. I actually was part of a Jane Black story that she wrote for the Wall Street Journal. I mentioned this to y'all. Okay, so she went to Claude, Anthropic's AI bot, and said, write me an Andrew Nguyen recipe that uses pork and lemongrass and fish sauce or something like that. And Claude mined Andrew Nguyen recipes and books and whatever Claude uses and spit out these kind of quasi-random recipes. And then Jane sent them to me and had me review them.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, well, Claude gets you there 65%.
Yeah.
And then the other 35% is crap. And it just doesn't make sense. But I mean, these bots learn very quickly. So I think that as a writer, I don't pay that much attention to them, but I do get them in my Google feed, whenever AI generated response. And you think about that. And if folks are out there writing recipes on their websites or in a Substack or something, that all can get mined. So you want to think about that because the bots get so smart. I mean, Kate, you've taken those driverless cars.
Oh, yes. I have to say, this is not a plug for Waymo, but it's very relaxing. I don't know if that makes me sound like a bad person.
Well, because they don't talk to you.
Yeah, exactly.
They play the soothing music and they always go the speed limit. They obey the laws of the road most of the time. But now apparently I've heard they're acting a little bit more aggressive and that really scares the heck out of me. So it is that way with AI. You might use ChatGPT and then it lulls you into this thing where you're all of a sudden using it all the time. So sometimes I go back to that study that was done years and years ago about London cab drivers and how much brain power they had because they had maps of London in their brain. They didn't have to use apps to figure out their way around. And so I wonder when we outsource so much of our thinking to other avenues, what we're losing in our brains.
Yeah. I feel like there's an emptiness.
Yeah. What are people doing if they're outsourcing their thinking?
Two things. One, you talk about using AI to write recipes. And I thought, Kristen, in your newsletter, I think the week before, you told a funny story. I'm going to ask you to tell that one again about using AI to do a David Leibowitz recipe a few years ago and then doing it again.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so how it's evolved. But there's this other, I was talking to somebody about the Substack and how some weeks I'm like, I don't know, how do you get in? Where do I start here? And they said, you don't use AI to do your Substack? I'm like, hell no. And this is someone who has a Substack and they do a very nice job. And they say that that's their first pass. Their first draft.
Seriously?
Oh, wow. I always write my first draft.
I would I mean, just for my own creative process, how I figure out where I'm going to get to. If I got rid of that, I don't even know what I would come out of my, fingertips. But I don't know. I'm very old school and I get that. But there is an emptiness there. To me, I mean, I often I love being a writer. I don't always love writing. I sometimes struggle. It's hard to get the words on the page sometimes, but I wouldn't be a writer if I was using AI to find my way in. I mean, unless it's a letter of complaint to the manufacturer of my car tires or sure. But even that, I kind of want to do that myself too.
People have talked about this, but writing isn't just writing, but it really is a way to figure out what you think, especially if you have all this chatter going on in your brain. It's a way to organize your thoughts. So I've been trying out different things lately where I think for this past weekend for my newsletter, I was so amped up, but that I actually just talked into my phone for a while. And that was sort of the really shitty first draft. And then I sent the transcript to myself and then I craft it at real well thought out paragraphs. I will say sometimes I'll play around with ChatGPT after I write something and I'll be like, what would you suggest for light edits? What would you suggest for a punchier edit? And then occasionally I'll I'll scalpel things out of it, but I don't know. Sometimes it just leaves me feeling really depressed.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Especially when I ask for it to be punchier, because then I'm like, this doesn't sound like me at all. I'm like, this is too cheeseball for me. So I actually like Grammarly as an editing, a quick copy editing tool.
I guess if the chatbot got to know you better, which means then you would have to establish a relationship so you wouldn't be so lonely and empty talking to a computer to code, that it would then be able to craft something that was tailored to Kristen Donnelly's voice. But then that would mean repetition on your part. I don't know, man. I got so many other things in my life to do.
Right.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, people make it seem like it's this time saver, but I actually have found I like writing. So for me, I almost use it. It doesn't necessarily save time because then I'm really thinking about like, do I like this turn of phrase better than what I
And they've done
wrote?
studies about
Yeah.
this. Cal Newport's podcast, which is all about deep work and just kind of a slow life, kind of his whole thing is that if you give yourself enough time and focus, you can really become an expert in a field. And then that makes you untouchable in a way. Be so good they can't ignore you is kind of like, I think, his whole shtick. But on an episode of his podcast, he talked about how they looked at a group of coders who were coding, just without a ChatGPT type of tool, and then a group of coders who used AI to help them write the code. The group that didn't use AI finished faster. I think the code was sort of better, but the group that used AI, it took them slower because they were in constant conversation, but they felt like it was a nicer process because they were outsourcing some of the struggle of creativity and some of the struggle of like making, connections. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that coding study actually does apply to writing, because if you are using a function to make writing feel easier and like simpler and like less stressful, that could feel nice, but like the end result might not necessarily be any good, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't love writing. I like having written. Sometimes you get into a flow state where it's lovely, but those are rare and far between. But I still think that's part of the struggle. Like that's what you come to the page for.
One thing that does annoy me is everybody thinks now that anything with an M dash is
Thank you
AI.
for bringing that up.
I'm like, I always used an M dash, and now I feel self-conscious about it.
Oh my God. So let me ask you guys something. So you have done so many collaboration works, and I feel like if someone's writing with AI, it's sort of like a collaborative writing project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I found like in my current collaboration project with Pim on the Thai cookbook, we're writing together sometimes when we're polishing things. And that's like a very special experience. And it's very human.
Mm-hmm.
When you come up with something together, it's very rewarding. I would not ever think that a chatbot could give me that experience.
No, I don't think so, because, well, chatbots, I guess depending, but they tend to be very agreeable, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you need friction to make a book good. You can't get along the whole time.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about having something to say. Like, I think we all know the loneliness of like especially if you're doing a newsletter and you don't have an editor and you're like, I hope this is good, and you want someone else to read it. AI could be something to just check against to say, does this sound, but it's going to be a conglomeration. It's not going to have an opinion. It's just going to soften anything and make it non-offensive to as many people as possible. Really, to me, that seems like so. I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. You want to push harder, lean further into your opinions, take a stance, believe your sentence is good, and run it.
You can ask, like, if you write something opinionated, you can ask if you want it to poke holes.
Right, in your argument.
Yeah, to see if there's anything you feel like addressing.
Yeah, but I don't know. Sometimes I read this stuff and it's just some people on social media write stuff and it's so AI oriented because it's too polished.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, that's a really good point, Andrea, because I have seen in hearing what people are talking about and what allegedly works on social media, sometimes mistakes are actually a sign. Gretchen Rubin, the well-known writer who writes about happiness, she had a slide the other day that had a typo in it. And, she has a team of people making her social media, I'm sure. But it was almost like, I'm sure it wasn't intentional. However, it was like kind of a nice thing that someone who's this New York Times bestselling author, who has a team of social media strategists, probably, I'm assuming, they still can like have an error. That means there's real humans putting out that content. So that maybe, that typo in your caption, leave it. No one's going to care. Maybe they'll just be like, it's human.
Actually, the one thing with AI that when I've really played with it, I'm like, so everybody just becomes copy and pasters. Like, it's so depressing. Like, so we're just like constantly like copying and pasting into a Canva or copying and pasting into a Substack. Like, that's our role now. Is
that's
just
creation.
Copy and paste. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah. We're just DJs spinning copy, right? We're not actually creating it.
Yeah. It's something I was already thinking about before. There was a New York Times article. I'm sure many people have talked about this, but with raising a child, I have a young teenager and I'm always like, what's going to be next? But something people talked about is enhancing your taste, whether that's, I guess taste could be aesthetic, but also just expertise in general. To me, they kind of dovetail. But I feel like for our audience in general, the problem with letting AI think for you or do that thinking work for you is then you're not necessarily developing your taste. You're just becoming a copy paster.
Right. You don't know what you like. Or you don't like things until you're sure it's safe to like it.
And you don't have a voice. When we talk about voice, who's your voice?
Yeah. There's something that in our recent rerun episode with David Leibowitz, he talked about not wasting your readers' time. Like if people are reading your newsletter, you don't want to waste their time. You want to give them actual usable things, something that helps somebody or does something for them in that moment. And I feel that that's something that humans do because we know inherently what is not wasting someone's time. And that's something that just to keep in mind when you're developing your voice. If you want a Substack newsletter that goes out to people, what is your point of difference? What are you giving them? And don't waste their time. And sometimes I do feel chatbots will pad language with a lot of things that sound like sentences, but actually don't have any meaning whatsoever.
Gibberish.
Yeah. So just something to think about in any kind of writing. It makes me wonder, we're going to go back to handwriting. But no, we're not going back to handwriting. Let's just talk about the value of print. Cookbooks are sold mostly in print. I think the vast majority of cookbooks are sold as a printed product. I have to say, cookbooks are getting more expensive, but man, are they getting more beautiful? I think some of the books that I've seen this whole year, they're stunning. There's some really stunning books.
Right.
Yeah, I think the design and layout's getting more interesting.
Yeah.
So the overall packaging, getting more arty. In America, we tend to be more conservative in our cookbook designs than in Australia or the UK. I remember going to Australia, to Sydney and Melbourne and looking at their cookbooks back in 2009. And I was going, what the hell is wrong with us in the United States? Here, I bought a cookbook simply because there was a flocked cover, Elvis wallpaper kind of shit. And it felt so good to touch it. I mean, I brought that 4-pound thing home with me in my luggage because it was so beautiful. I never used it, but I own it.
Yeah. It is fun to look when you're traveling at cookbooks locally. See what we're missing.
Right.
But we're catching up too.
Yeah.
So bravo to cookbook designers and editors and authors.
Right.
Do you think a lot of the most beautiful books are ones first published in the UK or Australia, Kate?
Not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
One publisher that's doing amazing work is Hardy Grant, and they have a North America presence, but they did start in Australia. So maybe there is something about learning from the Australian market and the UK market. Ottolenghi is another hybrid where, they launched in the UK, but they've been such a big success in North America. Just the debates people got into online a few years ago about an Ottolenghi cover and why Americans can't have illustrated covers. Well, I'm definitely seeing more illustrated covers these days.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing beautiful photography that is about food on the cover too. And I don't think one means you can't have the other. But I do think as an art object, cookbooks are becoming something that you want in your home. And I feel like that might be even more important now. But I also think, back to, print is here to stay. There's just a lasting quality there. There's that idea of canon that we've talked about on this show before, that maybe going back into older cookbooks that were published before there was so much widespread sharing of recipes can help you find these gems. In a future episode, we will be talking about an iconic Italian cookbook that is being released in English for the first time. And there's recipes in there I guarantee you have not seen in all these other Italian cookbooks that are in English. So going back, to sources that were made, before the internet was such a big recipe place could be really fascinating from a creativity, like what you want to cook in the kitchen. If you're a recipe creator, maybe I can go back and look for inspiration. I mean, do any of you do that? I mean, Andrea, I know that you have some really great vintage books.
I do. I have a lot of vintage books in the Asian category, and I go back to them all the time because I learn so much more than I learn online. Online I learn about say what's going on in Vietnam now, but then I'm always like, how does that compare to what was going on in Vietnam 50, 60 years ago? What was that dish like? Because I know there'll be a day when my mother will not be around for me to ask anymore, and even she doesn't know everything. So you look back and it's not curated content. It's not filtered, it's not written for SEO. It's just like this body of knowledge. Molly and I have talked about this. It's like this common knowledge of recipes and food in a particular cuisine's canon that everyone's supposed to know to be a good cook, to have taste. And nowadays, things tend to be so generic, Kristen. And it's kind of like this leveling out of content. So if you put gochujang into everything, like what happens to gochujang?
Exactly.
It loses its specialness.
It was like the cacio e pepe kind of craze from a few years ago, and how many cookbooks have that recipe in some way, shape, or form.
Right. And now cacio e pepe, potato chips or something, and so like, wouldn't you want to know like some of the like old school version of cacio e pepe and how they made it?
Right.
Well, if you do, we talk about that in our forthcoming episode about the Italian.
That's true. Nice teaser.
Well, and also the idea of primary research. And when we spoke to the authors of the avocado book, we talked about this and, how avocado toast goes back to the 1920s, and they found like the original, and just this sort of notion of, as a cookbook author, don't you want to know where it came from, where it fits culturally, historically, rather than just write another recipe for gochujang cacio pepe?
Potato chips?
Probably.
With chili crisp. You got to add chili crisp on it too. And then that'll like really kind of like gild the lily.
I'm like, that probably does exist.
Yeah, I bet it exists.
It might be kind of good. Yeah.
And even if it is good, or there's a similar mashup that's good, it's so much more interesting, I think, from a reader as a cook to know how it got there.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
And then it gives you something to write about in your head note, because you actually know something other than this is the best dish you've ever made.
Right.
This is so delicious.
Happy robot voice is dead. We know that. I mean, like AI has destroyed happy robot voice. Thanks, Tori Ritchie, a former podcast guest, for giving us that phrase. But yeah, you don't want to write like a robot. I did want to just go back to print for a real quick moment. There was a conversation with Jenny Rosenstrach about why cookbooks matter. And for her, someone who's created online content for a while, it seemed, and I'm just paraphrasing her words, but it was something about when you write a recipe for a cookbook, it has to be really good to make the cut to actually be printed, because there's no delete key.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something else that I think about when someone does have a big body of work on the internet, but maybe they have one or two books. Like those books should be where the best recipes are, right? The ones that have maybe been triple tested, quadruple tested, the ones that really have like stood this test of time that fit into this collection. So that's something that there's just something like that just feels more valuable about a printed page. And for people who are writing books, don't waste that space. That's valuable real estate.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I got to tell you, I've spoken to some people who have been internet sensations.
Oh,
with websites and YouTubes and stuff like that. They're like, well, here's my problem. I've already given away all my best recipes for free. And I said,
what do you do? Yeah.
What do you do? You got to repackage it somehow. Because if people can get that content for free, why should they pay for it in a book? And that's something you want to think about.
Yeah.
Right. And don't most cookbook contracts still say this is original work?
There's usually a percentage.
There's
like
normally a percentage.
Maybe 90%, 80% has to be
new.
Original.
That's so tricky because like to get noticed to begin with, they were doing all this online. And then they got noticed. They got this big following. So they're getting a book deal. But the reason they got the big following is they gave away all this. I don't know. It's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing.
But I got to say, there's a point where I'm like, well, how much money are you making online? And maybe you should just stay online because you know what? It's a lot easier. Do you need a book?
I've always wondered this in some ways. And maybe somebody who has self-published would have an answer. Does it really need to be original? Because it's just such a different experience having a book. So if you take your best stuff, even if it's online, but you repackage it, it's reshot maybe in a different way. Perhaps the method has been even more refined than what you did online, like new testing informed something. I sometimes wonder, would the diehard fans still buy it anyway? Because they want that piece. They want the experience, like being on a website where you're just dealing with all the ads versus like a beautiful book. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I've thought about that too. Let's say, you had a website and you say, these are my best, our most popular recipes.
Mm-hmm. Collected together in a beautiful volume.
Well, New York Times did that last year.
Yeah, exactly. Good point,
Right.
Kate. Like those kind of compendiums do exist. But so I wonder sometimes for creators, I don't know that the publishers would change their minds, but I am curious, like, does it really hurt sales? I don't know.
I'd also be curious to talk to an editor or a publisher if you sign, say, a big TikTok cooking star and publish their recipes for the first time. Like you're saying, Kristen, wouldn't their audience want the recipes that they've been following on TikTok?
Yeah.
I would think rather than, I mean, there will always be the people who will say, why would I buy your book when I can get this free
Sure.
online? But I don't know if there's enough of them. And going and reading a recipe and a caption is just like a terrible experience.
Yeah, it's not the same as in a cookbook. So that's a bet that an acquisition editor a house has to make on a TikTok star.
But I'm curious if somebody who's self-published, you know, let's say they have their recipes online, but then they've also self-published a book, and if they've had success, call us.
Let us know.
Yes.
It'd be really interesting.
We want to know.
Yeah. Well, and let's get into this conversation, though, a little bit deeper, because the idea of being, say, somebody who's known on the internet, it also goes along with the idea of being an entrepreneur. And I feel like authors are also have to be entrepreneurs. It's just really hard to get noticed, get a book out in the world. And it's not getting easier. People are distracted. So I feel like the amount of work an author needs to do to really get a book in front of people has grown a lot. And it really does seem to benefit the people who are the big time sort of entrepreneurs, the ones that are thinking about publishing a book in an entrepreneurial business sense, rather than here's this art I created. Now I want other people to put it in the right hands. Like that doesn't work.
Or this knowledge I have that I want to share.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I feel like, especially for nonfiction, I think it's true for all books, but especially for nonfiction, for prescription nonfiction, for cookbooks, unless it's this really specific single subject where there's like a direct link to the place it's going to be sold. And I'm really struggling right now to find that perfect example, but I know those books exist. You know, Chronicle Books is a place that really kind of goes after niche areas they feel like they can sell into a specialty market. But I would say for an author, like if you want to sell some books, you got to hustle. Andrew, we've talked about this before about the hustle, like what you have to do as an author and how exhausting it can be. But I just want to hear like just new thoughts. Like, is it getting harder than ever? Are there new ways to do it that make it fun again? Any of you have thoughts on that?
It's scary. I think that there are a lot of people out there who were successful on their first books, you know, because they were in social media and they may not find the same level of success again with their follow-up books because people are distracted. And I don't know, I think that it's really, really difficult. And something that may have worked last year or this year may not work in 2 or 3 years for sales.
Yes.
Right? And I've seen successful author like merch stuff, like open up a store to sell things that are probably name dropped in their book. And I mean, it's just kind of like all of this packaging to like push a book out and get noticed. It's kind of disappointing at the same time because, you know, you put so much heart and soul into putting together a book and getting it out. And then all of a sudden you're like, now I have to package it. You know, I basically have to merch it.
Right.
To get in front of people's eyes and to get them to shell out 35, 40, 50 bucks for it. Shoot, you know, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
For a book or a book sale. Every single sale is really hard, I feel.
Yeah.
Kristen, you were saying something a couple conversations ago about events, and it feels like maybe it's just sort of in post-pandemic, but that events have a certain amount of energy around them that we might not have seen before. And I think that's true for a certain segment of cookbook authors, but it's like, you know, fewer big successes like that take up all the oxygen for the smaller books.
Yeah, it seems like with events, like there are authors who are going to be their own draw. I mean, Andrea, you've had that experience where you can like pack a room. We had Rick Martinez on. He can do a tour and like pack a room. But then there are also events where you can go be part of it. And maybe you're not the draw yourself, but, you know, Cherry Bomb does events where they often will have signings. There are other similar types of food festivals and food fairs, carnivals.
Book fairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Book fairs. But also, I mean, if you're like somebody like a canning author or a pie author, like maybe there's a dovetail.
But you know what? I don't want this to be a downer point. okay, because I sounded like I was being crabby. But I think also there are still opportunities that exist. And Molly, you brought up a point. I think that oftentimes we look too much the same markets to the coast.
Absolutely.
And there is so much going on all over the country, all over the world in terms of food. Go beyond the usual suspects to find an audience, and you will find your people.
Yeah. Musicians even talk about that sometimes, like how it's so hard to sell out, something in New York, but you go to Kansas City and
sell out.
Right.
Yeah.
They're so happy to see you.
Yeah.
Sale's a sale, man. Doesn't matter where it happens.
Right.
Yeah.
It does take, I think, a lot more sort of entrepreneurial planning before a launch on the author than it has previous. And something that seems to always, that can move the needle are ticketed events. If you know a restaurant and you can do an event there and everyone who comes to the restaurant gets a book as part of their ticket, then it makes it worth everyone's while. On top of that, it's not just about that sale on that day, but it's the content you can create at that event that then you can post for a week after on social media. And then I think that's the thing. And now it's like we all have to be thinking about what's content that we can use to create this like long tail of a book launch where you're introducing people who are so excited to see this book. You're bringing in fans of the subject matter if you're not the big name. It's just things that you really do have to think of yourself as launching this product and how you're going to find the market. And honestly, a lot of it, love or hate social media, but I feel like it's hard not to be online on some sort of platform to get the word out about cookbooks.
Yeah.
Well, just one thing about a cookbook is that if the cookbook is the goal and then you're like, that's it, all I want to do is write a cookbook, I think that's problematic because being a cookbook author can really help your career. It can help your whatever else you're working on. You've published a cookbook that gives you a certain level of authority of somebody if it's traditionally published. So that's something not to lose sight of. So even if the sales aren't, everything you want them to be, it's still an enormous attribute to what you're working on, to the rest of your career. Is something to think about.
Agree. I was actually just thinking about how I think a lot of people even still, they almost want to like start with a book. And maybe in the past, people could, like they could kind of collect their expertise in a more anonymous space and then come out with the book. And then the book is the thing that launches them. But it's very rare now for that to be the order. It really has to be like you're already doing the thing. You're putting all the things out there. You're known for something, even if you're not known by a wide audience, but maybe known within a space. And, we have an example during this season where there's somebody who wrote books about family food, but she was the editor of Parents Magazine. So she wasn't necessarily known like with tons and tons of followers, but that could follow her name. So it gave her that credibility. And then she also had access to the Parents Magazine audience to help sell a book. So I have talked to people over the years they've maybe like collected some expertise, decades of cooking in their own kitchen by themselves. And then they're like, I want to do a book, but nobody else has known what they're doing. They're not known for anything. So that's what's daunting.
How do you start?
Well, you're suddenly like, I want to do a book. And you're like, well, 10 years ago, you should have started building your audience.
Yeah, but maybe then you're just better off writing a community cookbook for your
Absolutely.
own circle.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And there's plenty of pride in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Some people.
Yeah. They want notoriety.
Yeah.
Correct. And unfortunately, it's just a slower build.
It is a slower build for any kind of publishing endeavor.
Actually, one thing, a little like, just to be slightly more optimistic, everything changes constantly. But if you can learn successful video creation, that can mean many things, but you can grow quite fast on some of these platforms. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But there's somebody I follow, not in the food space. She started in April of this year, of 2025.
Wow.
And now has like hundreds of thousands of followers because she has something to say that people are constantly sharing and commenting. And like, that's how these things work, right? They want you to stay on the platform. So if you can learn that skill, I'd actually argue you can, in some ways, grow that audience faster than ever before but it's not easy.
Right. It's not easy. And you really have to be putting yourself out there, which you would have to be doing anyway on a book tour or, book promotion. But this is like you're doing that first and then doing the book after. I did want to actually talk about, say you are writing a book, maybe you're working with a personality or a chef, and you really care that printed product is as good as it can be. Let's go into a little bit about just how to make sure those recipes are good, are worthy of the page. Let's say I have all my recipes, I've worked on them myself, or I'm worked on them with a chef and I've written them to the best of my ability and I think they make sense. I want to get them tested. I don't really know how to go about that process. Do I send it to my best friend and give her a questionnaire? What are the best practices for testing recipes effectively?
It's a really important question. We have talked about it. And I think that sort of the general terms, I would just say be really intentional about it. Be really organized and be really prescriptive to the people. Yeah, it's fine to have your best friend or your neighbor give it a run through, but it's not that that's not valuable, but I don't consider that actual testing. Testing is and whether it's free or paid for, there are a lot of different models out there, but there has to be a certain element, in my mind, a certain element of rigor to it. And you have to be asking some very specific questions that you want answers to.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's a protocol that testers need to follow. They need to understand that. They need to give you constructive feedback, not just like, that was so delicious.
Mm-hmm.
They're there to catch your mistakes and also to tell you what things that they did to make the recipe a little different or to work for them. It's not completely a validation of what you've done. That's too easy. Why even get it tested if you know that they're really good? You want to get them tested because skepticism is good about your own work. And we all need help. We all need editing. I love editing, and my recipe testers help me edit and make better recipes, and I encourage them. So that's one thing, is that empowerment is to communicate that empowerment to recipe testers. It's like, you are helping me or us make a better book because you're going to do it in your kitchen.
That's so important, to empower them to give that kind of feedback, because people might feel squeamish, if it feels negative. Right. It's like, you're either going to spend money or you're going to spend time. But what I mean is, you can hire a professional recipe tester that you like, who has come recommended, and maybe work with like 1 to 2 pros where you pay them and you're going to get a high level of feedback, and they'll probably be skilled enough with recipe writing that they'll potentially add some edits. So it will be a time savings. Whereas if you go the volunteer route, you're often working with a lot of volunteers, because you're not necessarily asking volunteers to cook like 30 recipes for you. It's usually, up to 5 maybe. So that's just a lot of management, a lot of back and forth. And maybe if you're working with volunteers, you might want multiple people to run it through. Whereas if you're working with a professional, maybe you feel fine about it just being one person. So I don't know. Those are the kinds of things I consider. Like, if you save the money, you'll probably end up spending quite a bit of time in the management and just your own editing and possibly retesting.
Yeah. Let me ask you the kinds of questions do you say give everyone a questionnaire that goes along with a recipe? So say if I had a recipe for Caesar salad, what are the kinds of questions I might have that I would want a tester to answer?
What are the ingredients called for in a clear way? I feel like would be one,
Yeah, were the ingredients listed in order called for in the instructions? Does the head note sell the recipe to you? Did the instructions make sense?
Did they feel like they were in the right order?
How'd you like the outcome?
Right.
Was it worth the effort?
And Molly, you have a grading system, right?
Yeah, I use a grading system, and I put it there. It's almost like a taunt, because if you give it a C or a D, it's either, or even a B, it's either out or going back to development. So I'm sort of offering it as it's part of, was it worth the effort type thing? Because, a recipe that requires a great deal of work or expense better damn well deliver something that'll blow your socks off. Whereas something, if your Caesar salad is like 3 ingredients, it takes 5 minutes and is delicious, maybe that's a super helpful recipe for your book. I also think about who your testers are. It's really important how that relates to who your readers are. Like, are you writing for beginner cooks? if you're using professional testers, sometimes they're even better at this. Like they can assume the knowledge level of a beginner cook and help you say, no one's going to know what
folded in
sweat the onion means, folded in means. Whereas if you have a volunteer who's a very avid home cook and just understands all this stuff, they could whip through your recipe, even if it was not as well written as you might like, and say it works great for them. So that's when I go back to when I say be very intentional, because you need to say, what are your objectives in this recipe? Are you trying to teach someone how to make a proper emulsified salad dressing? That's a very different recipe for Caesar salad than one that's just how to get that quick Caesar on the table, without much effort.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree.
It's tricky.
It is. You have to pick your recipe testers well, almost like train them in a way. I mean, some of my recipe testers have been testing for me since the beginning of my career. So over 20, some of them are new, and the new ones I'm kind of like,
break them in,
like show them the ropes more. Yeah. But you do want to be intentional. Who is your audience? What kind of information are you digging for as an author? What do you want to get out of testing? It's not just because you were committed to it in your contract, and please be reminded that you signed that book publishing contract, and it says all recipes must be tested by someone other than the author.
Mm-hmm.
Who is that person? And even when you go to assign the testing, because I use volunteer testers, I think about the person. It's like, would they pick this recipe? Is this their recipe?
Oh, interesting.
Is this a potential fit for their kind of cooking, their lifestyle, their location? I ask them all kinds of questions. Are you willing to shop in an Asian market? How often? Where do you shop? And also dietary restrictions or preferences, because you don't want to give a gluten-free person a really complicated bread recipe.
Unless it's a gluten-free bread. So that's a really good point, too. It just really depends on the book itself. It might depend on the individual recipes, on the questions you want answered. So lots to think through there, but lots of good questions to ask.
I do think it's worth sort of repeating that asking your testers to read the recipe as well as cook from the recipe. You want to know if something is written badly or not clearly or out of order. And so empowering them to also be a editor.
Yeah, it's a beta read. Like they're beta readers, they're beta testers.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are the audience for the book that's going to prove that the audience will get this concept, and they can point out some flaws before it's actually too late to fix them. In closing, I know we want to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to have some parting thoughts on comp titles. We got a lot of comments about comps after we did our comp episode last season, and it seems like the comments keep kind of rolling in. Frances Baca, a friend of the podcast, had a really good note that she left about another Substack she read that's called How to Glow in the Dark Substack. It's from a literary agency called Neon Literary. The topic is when your comp isn't a book. I think it goes back into book comps as vibes versus actual books. My hot take on this is I think when it comes to a comp title, this would be like Indiana Jones meets The Slanted Door. I mean, that would be kind of like, okay, this cookbook is like, it's going to be like a Vietnamese restaurant cookbook, but it's taking you on an adventure into, like, that to me is a very confusing kind of comp. I'm thinking that a comp that isn't a book in the cookbook world is a harder comp to make than it is in the, say, if I'm writing a novel that's a spy thriller, I could make maybe a movie comp and a book comp and put them together. With a cookbook, I'm still struggling to think of, maybe you would say things like, is it Top Chef meets, I'm thinking you would probably have to be like a food media.
Chef's Table
Chef's
or something.
Table meets the French Laundry Cookbook. I don't know. Like, I don't know what a comp would be for if it's not a cookbook, in the cookbook world specifically.
So Kathleen Schmidt of Publishing Confidential has talked a bit about this before. Not so much as comp titles, but about just attention and how, we've all realized that things are just competing for our attention. Books, media, social media, whatever. So she has talked about trying to think of if my reader likes this or watches Chef's Table or whatever, I don't know, they might like this book. I don't think I would put that in the comp title section though, however.
No, that would be more like an audience.
I agree.
And if you were doing like X meets Y, Indiana Jones versus Slanted Door.
Which would be a kind of an amazing sort of mashup. I don't know what it would look like.
Yes. Like you could do that with design, I think. But as a comp, I don't think that the movie or art piece or whatever would be driving the bus. Because comps people are taking a look at for sales and
like editorial point of view, I guess.
Yeah. Frances has this deep career in cookbook design, so it totally would make sense to bring that up as a point of reference for presenting comps. But I think in terms of authors, you want to do something like that a little bit lightly. That's almost like in an overview thing, like, hey, let's like take Indiana Jones on a trip through Vietnam, and I'm gonna show them jungly foods.
When Frances wrote about it, she talks about how using non-traditional comps can rev up, is the word she used, rev up the interest. So I think it is what we're talking about. It's like more in the vision of the book or the overall description, just trying to kind of break out of a really boring description of what you're doing.
Or really boring proposals. This could be part of a tagline.
Broadening the cultural conversation, I think, is the way she frames it. Just sort of putting it in a larger context.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. But yeah, I did like the way that Kathleen had talked about it in terms of just attention.
Right. Attention economy. Yeah. So any more thoughts on comps? We welcome them. We might have to do a comp episode part 2. It's the gift that keeps on giving. This was a delightful conversation. It was so nice to be back together again, everyone. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for hosting. And here's to season 8.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.